Hey everyone, today's video is one of those little quickies, which is more of a kind of tooltip than a full tutorial, and it's based on this sim, which I mean, probably not one of those I was most happy with, but if you look closely, you can see that there's a letter I, and as the water splashes down, at some point this shatters into pieces and falls to the ground. So that's really what I wanted to show you and make you aware of, that we have under the object dynamics here, we have 4 different waves of fracturing our geometry. So let's take a look at that. First things first, to go really straightforward, we just create a cube and go to object dynamics and go fracture, and you get to choose the number of pieces and you hit OK. And once you do that, you get, well, you guessed it, a fractured object. It can be a little hard to see like where the pieces are actually going, because not only is it splitting off the geometry, but it's also triangulating it. So not every line here is going to be an actual cut, if you know what I mean. So that's good to be aware of. If we really quick want to see what's going on here, let's create a plane and gravity. And let's take the fractured object and turn it into an active rigid body and set the plane to a passive. And with that, I'm just going to disable the command line and just hit sim. We might as well hide the original cube. So now we can kind of see how this is taking effect. So we only created 20 pieces, which is not a lot. So you can delete the fractured object if you want to, and go back to the cube and do another fracture. Let's say 50 pieces this time. And as we've covered before in the first object dynamics video, I guess the letter, let's see, the letter D, where we did the text object, you get a multi-body, which is one node, but it has several objects inside of it. So that is good to be aware of when you're setting things like when you do active rigid body and you're setting up things like density. It's going to be a multiplication of the volume and the value that you put in here that determine what the mass per piece is going to be. So if you have really tiny pieces, they're going to be pretty light and might not fall as fast as the bigger chunks. You can always go back to that original object and fracture it again. But you can also say, oh, I'm kind of liking the major shapes here, but I want further to fracture this. You can always take the actual multibody and fracture that object itself. So let's say I take those 50 pieces and fracture them, let's say 10 pieces, then we're going to have the same result as we would have put in 500 in the beginning. If I focus on this new object and turn that into an active rigid body, I'm working really destructive here, as you can see, but just to keep this scene nice and clean, but obviously you might want to save those objects. I hope that's obvious. So it's going to take a little longer to simulate now, and if you don't want to wait too long, it's good to be aware of that the default settings for Karante are, I mean, Karante is very accurate solver, but sometimes when you want fast results, you might want to bring this down to a fairly low value. So this is going to give me a lot less substeps. And when it comes to a lot of pieces or like a heavy scene, good practice is to always go back to frame 0 and always make sure you save frequently. And don't change settings like density, for example. Don't just pause and change the density, because that can make the app prone to crashing. So here we have a rubble of pieces, and there are ways of controlling this, the way that they kind of stick together, unless there's a certain amount of pressure, etc. And that is the multi-joint feature. But I will be going through that in the next video, where we will cover the object dynamics. In this video, I just want to focus on the different types of fracture. So let's undo what we did and bring up a cube again, because now we've seen, you know, the main fracture. And if we instead go fracture by steering geometry, so let's say If I remember correctly, this is the one you can use. So let's say I'm going to be flying like a bullet through here, or some other type of projectile. I might kind of want to pre-shatter based on the point of entry. So let's say I have a bullet coming this direction. I might take the cube, shatter by steering geometry, and select that steering geometry and select cylinder. I hope this is right. And then you have, so a little different properties here, but we still have number of pieces, and we have some steering resolution, things like that. Typically don't play around with that too much. Let's see what we get. I wouldn't say we got a huge concentration of, yeah, maybe these are kind of converging. So let's go to the Realflow help and say steering geometry. Control zones of high or low fragment concentration for impact areas. Okay. Let's say we do, for example, another cube. And let's say we pick this as the steering geometry. And see if there's a bigger concentration of shatters inside of the steering cube. That would be interesting. Highest concentration inside. Yeah, so you can kind of see that there's more geo generated inside of the steering geometry. So that makes sense. Next up is fracture by points. So we may as well bring up the help again, but I think, or let's do this. Let's do a cylinder and just try it out. Because what's the worst that can happen, right? So I'm just going to sink it down a bit, and I'm going to go, I'm not entirely sure how it looks at those points, but I could imagine it's the vertices. So say okay. Yeah, so kind of same thing, but I guess it's not looking at the volume of the object, it's rather looking at the vertices. You can see kind of a concentration around the vertices there. So that could be cool, especially if you want like the shape of an object to kind of hollow out whatever you're doing. And last but not least, there is a radial shatter, and that's especially useful for, you know, when you have glass breaking and you get kind of hairline cracks in a kind of spiderweb fashion. You can use this fracture Voronoi radial, and you can pick the same object that you're fracturing. If you want to have the origin of the cracks in the center of the origin, and you got to figure out which is the front facing axis, which in this case is X. So I'm just going to hit OK, and you're going to see that from the point of the center here, if that's the point of impact that you want, that's where the shatter gets generated. But let's go back and take a look at another option, because, for example, if you bring in a model of a statue, let's say, your pivot is likely going to be on the floor, and if you pick this one and you pick your own object, then the origin of the shatter is going to be on the floor. So it's easier to take an object like a null, for example, and have that as a steering geometry. So I can go fracture radial, pick the null, and now, so it's going to originate from the position of the null, and still I'm going to use X. And there you can see that effect. But I'm going to undo again and go, we're not going to fracture the null, we're going to fracture the cube. Still have that setting. You can pick how many rays, kind of like the lines from the center and outwards. So that pretty much gives you more resolution. And ray angle randomness, value of 0, 1, so on or off basically. You want a bit of randomness in there, or is it maybe a float? Oh yeah, so okay. So between 0 and 1, it's a float, so you can do 0.5 for 50% randomness, for example. And noise and twist, I'm going to do a bit of that. I'm not going to change these too much, but you can play around with these settings if you like. So now we're going to get a little more organic result, if you will. Maybe a little too organic, but you're never happy, I guess. So I'm gonna go 0.1 noise, 0.1 twist, and 0.25 angle randomness. Let's see, yeah, better, I guess. So let's get rid of that null and the original cube, and let's hit active rigid body. So first of all, if we just want this to fall down, we can see the result of that. But it typically makes more sense to have, you know, some kind of object trigger this shatter. So let's say I make a sphere here and I put it roughly where my shatter is. Let's see, yeah, pretty good guess actually. And just shrink it down. So this is gonna be my bullet. And I can either animate this, or I can actually make this into an active rigid body as well and just give it an initial velocity. And that initial velocity is going to be negative on the x-axis. So instead of going this way, we want to go that way. So negative velocity of, I don't know, playing around with twists. I would assume this is meters per second, so 25 meters per second. It's pretty fast, so I will go -10 instead. And since I'm currently on add to default hub, everything gets added to this hub and interacts with each other by default. So we're good to try this out. There we go, the trigger. And you know, it's not the prettiest thing in the world, since the cube was actually in the air when we started the sim, so that's not very nice. And like I said, you could employ the multi-joint technique to kind of stick things in place. Another thing you could do is playing around with actually keyframing the simulation state. So if I look at the cache, I can see that the sphere is going to hit on frame 3, so I can say that this is not going to start simulating the actual wall before frame 3. So I'll set a keyframe on active, go back 1 frame, set it to inactive, and set another keyframe. And let's see how that goes. Honestly, I would be a little cautious with this technique because it can create instabilities, but sometimes it works. And here, apparently the sphere, I should have gone 1 frame before, because it seems like the sphere had time to pass through. So I'll go -1 frame. Boom. So it's going to turn on frame 2. So now it didn't have time to fall to the floor. You can use these techniques with, I mean, you can have, as you saw in my example, you can have it interact with water. Water can force it to fall down. Pieces can cause splashes in the water, everything, things like that. If there's like a hero fracture and you want a lot of details in the cracks and things like that, there's probably other solutions that you're going to end up using. That being said, I think it's pretty cool to have it inside of Realflow, because it allows you to, you know, just at least plan out the action and try things out. So even though these object dynamics aren't the fastest, they're pretty accurate and stable once you have things set up. So that's it for today's little quick tip. I hope you had fun with your object fractures, and as usual, feel free to let me know what you can come up with this technique, and I'd be happy to share it on my social media channels. If you like this video, then pass it along to your friends who might want to know more about liquid sims or dynamics in Realflow. If you did not like it, if there's anything I could improve, then feel free to let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more of these, then hit the subscribe button. I would love to see you again here in the channel. So thanks for tuning in, and take care.